today's video we're doing a Theatre Thursday where we're going to be looking into the topic of analogue horror. Now, I'd been considering for a while doing something like this on analogue horror. I've been wanting to do some reactions, and the first one I thought of was Local 58, because that's kind of like the big analogue horror channel, but I figured everybody's already seen that already. Everyone already knows about Local 58, and there haven't been any new videos in a while to do a reaction to that's fresh and new. So I thought, why not start a little series of like analogue horror reactions, and for this first one I'll just do a little bit about the history of analogue horror and what to expect going forward from here, as well as a little example of something that you can expect to find in the coming videos. So I'm just going to switch over and let narrator Cack turn over while we take a look at some of the videos that we'll be looking at in future and where they came from in the past. Analogue horror is a fairly recent genre from around the past 5 years or so, which has been making its way around YouTube and the internet at large. It's been compared to other internet-based genres such as ARGs or found footage, but it isn't quite either of those things. Whereas found footage revolves around reviewing abandoned personal recordings from camcorder footage recorded by an individual caught in whatever happens to be taking place, analogue horror is more about archived footage from documented broadcasts, be they television or distributed home video. Also, in regards to ARGs, or alternate reality games, that genre requires some kind of interaction from the viewers to solve puzzles before the story can continue. While some analogue horror series may contain these interactive elements, it doesn't apply to the genre at large, and as such, the term ARG is often used incorrectly. Analogue horror often places itself in a fictionalized version of reality, a world that, for all intents and purposes, is exactly like our own. At least, it starts out that way. An ongoing series will serve as a sort of apocalyptic log, as some kind of event begins to overtake the setting and begin to influence the recordings. In some series, such as the aforementioned Local 58, an outside influence begins to intercept the normal broadcasts of the channel, sending cryptic messages through programming in order to either warn, threaten, or invade their world. In the series Gemini Home Entertainment, the videos are instead being distributed as documentaries which have been prepared and edited by a lone agent in the attempts to warn the greater populace of an oncoming threat and to possibly give the people of Earth a chance to survive. Many of these analogue horror stories deal with cosmic horror, not simply aliens, but things that are far more eldritch and Lovecraftian. Creatures and concepts far beyond what humans traditionally consider alive or aware. Gemini has the Iris, something lurking at the edges of the solar system, slowly making its presence felt on Earth as it draws closer, while Local 58 has the moon itself, or at least something residing within. Whatever it may be, the driving force of the analogue horror genre as a whole is usually the slow, creeping, oncoming threat to human life in general, and all we get to see is small snippets of it through the eyes of a small local community. Technically, analogue horror got its start at the same time that found footage did, with the Blair Witch Project. Not necessarily in the movie itself, but in the accompanying unfiction documentaries which presented the events of the movie and the legend of the witch itself as real events. Though, while this movie jump-started a host of camcorder-based found footage movies and series, the avenue of fake broadcast works wouldn't gain as much traction for a long while. Analogue horror is thought to have first began, or at least first popularized, with a series called CH/SS, a YouTube series that ran in 2016 and continued to post up until 2018, and even dropped a new trailer as recently as June 2020, promising more things to come. The series chronicles a psychological program for treating mental health which veers into conditioning and mind control. Things subtly build up with an atmosphere of being not quite right, as more elements are introduced that are not quite human. Another forerunner of the analog horror was a project called ECVA. This series again began in 2016 and was put together by the founder of Marble Hornets, the original Slenderman found footage series. In this series, a young man has inherited a property where he receives strange broadcasts from an unknown location. Some of these seem entirely non-threatening, if a little unusual, including broadcasts or advertisements, cartoons and other such footage, but one particular emergency broadcast puts a much more sinister spin on things.
Normal ECMA service has been interrupted to bring you an important service announcement. There will be a knock at the door. Do not open it. Stay inside for day and watch TV. This is very important. This is very important. Keep looking at me. Keep looking at me. Keep.
These two series, while being the first to lay down some of the more well-known analog horror tropes, were still very much part of the then very active ARG scene, including elements of puzzles and viewer interaction to drive and continue the story. It would still be a while before stories would separate themselves and become their own entities. And so we come back to Local 58. This is probably the big one that everyone knows, and where analog horror crossed a little more into the mainstream. As I said, I originally considered posting a reaction or analysis to this series itself, but most of you will probably already be familiar with it. One could argue that Local 58 was the original analog horror series, with its first video being created and posted in 2015 on a personal website. However, it didn't make its way over to YouTube until 2017. The story of Local 58 is not yet entirely clear. All that is apparent is that an entity currently known only as Him is trying to impose dominance upon the Earth and is sending signals through Local 58's broadcasts to do so, and that the moon itself has become some sort of cognito hazard. What sets Local 58 apart from the previous entries is that each video has a cohesive 3-act structure. No puzzles to solve, no codes to crack. It comes in, it tells a story, and even though each video is a snapshot of some larger event, each one can stand alone as a short story. Each video in the story does tie together, and it hints at something deeper, and while there's a lot of room for speculation, there is still an overall narrative. People are still trying to figure out the chronological order of the broadcasts and how they all connect, but I won't cover that here. There are plenty of other videos that can do better than I could. There's also a subreddit which you should go check out too. Local 58 was considered a monolith of the genre, with a rich amount of world building and production going into each piece. However, its downfall is in how slow updates have been. After initial uploads, the channel slowed to a crawl with only one release in each following year, not counting the channel promos and trailers, which, while not providing anything narrative-wise, do provide a few little clues here and there as to what may be going on behind the scenes. The creator has expressed frustration at having content that he's unable to publish currently, so all we can do is wait and hope the story can continue soon once our real world calms down. Despite this lack of activity, Local 58 still served as a Kickstarter for many other series, and the expansion of the analog horror genre. Many of the earlier series that formed after Local 58's appearance were heavily derivative of them, emulating the style of emergency broadcasts, such as those seen in Weather Report and Contingency. Even now, many analog horror videos follow a similar style or progression, and utilize a lot of the same tropes. Not that this is necessarily a bad thing, of course, but it can lead to a certain predictability at times. Although a standard element of analog horror is the corruption of familiarity. The more used to something we get, the more distressing it can be when those expectations are not only unmet, but completely warped. There are several channels dedicated to analog horror series, and I intend to react to them in the future, as well as several one-shot videos from other channels, and to give you a taste of what is to come, I'm going to show you a fairly recent example from the channel of animator and music video maker Gruesworks. In February, the video Blue Channel Thalassin was posted to the channel. It had the classic analog look of an 80s, 90s commercial and advertises a rather innocent-seeming medication to help with mood stabilization. But the wording doesn't seem quite right. Does the medication help restore your mood, or is it artificially stimulating an emotional override? Before we can really consider the implications of this, the advert is interrupted by a brief static and goes on to introduce Thalassin Plus, a new medication which will allow you to feel new artificial emotions. What is an artificial emotion? How can we possibly experience something so conceptually new and unfamiliar? Well, just when you might think that you don't want to know the answer, the commercial goes ahead and answers it for you anyway, or at least it provides an idea.
These new emotions include degrance, humber, nage, dorselessness, andric, veronate, harnish, hard, trantiveness, teluge, brick.
And just like that, we're dropped right back into the ending of the commercial, as though what we had just seen is entirely normal. And that's the overall element of analog horror, the idea that what we're seeing is nothing out of the ordinary. To us, it's something disturbing and horrifying, but in the universe of the world, such things may have become commonplace. Gruesworks isn't an analog horror channel though. There is a small section of videos dedicated to this idea of the Blue Channel, and I'd at least advise giving them a quick look. To describe the videos here wouldn't do them justice, it would only rob them of the whole point of what they are, but all I will say is that they are not screamers, there are no jump scares, it's an atmospheric thing. Simply take a moment to put them on, watch them, and absorb the atmosphere that it's putting down. I've always had a love of internet horror, creepypasta, found footage, ARGs and unfiction, all those kind of things. It's a genre that has evolved along with our technology and opened up all sorts of opportunities for new methods of storytelling. With analog horror growing and developing the way that it is, I feel that the best is yet to come.